This is the Self-Employed Mum podcast, the raw, honest truths of what it takes to be a mum and an entrepreneur. Running a business while raising small humans is an entirely different ballgame, and if you, like me, are in the thick of it right now, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Rhiannon Loudon, mom of two, proud entrepreneur, and CEO of two small businesses. And my guests, women who are juggling all the plates, building businesses while raising the next generation. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like, follow, and spread the word to help keep this podcast going. Now on to today's episode. Hello and welcome to the very first official episode of the Self-Employed Mum podcast. For those of you who have followed Small Fish, Big Pod for a while, you'll have realized there's been a little bit of a name change and a rebrand here. And I thought I would just record a short solo episode to talk you through the new plan for the podcast in the months to come. So Small Fish, Big Pod was born from a dream of finding my own way to connect female entrepreneurs in Scotland and further afield. And at the time that I started the podcast, I felt that there weren't that many other podcasts that were really celebrating women who ran small businesses, lots for women in the corporate world and lots for women in general. But it was just something that I felt really passionate about. As most of you will know too, I have built one of my two businesses, Small Fish Brand Co., around helping women start, grow, and build small businesses. And so obviously the podcast kind of went hand in hand with that. And a lot of my clients were guests on the show and it worked really, really well. But what I found was happening organically is a lot of the conversations were moving towards subjects of motherhood and entrepreneurship, how hard it is to be raising small children while also trying to grow a business. And I think those are the conversations that are top of mind for me right now because I am in the thick of that. I have a 2-year-old with some level of additional support needs that we're still figuring out, and a 6-year-old. And it is crazy trying to maintain two growing businesses while also raising these two growing children. So those are the conversations that are really top of mind for me. And there just isn't that much content out there that brings the two things together. So there's tons of books and blogs and podcasts on motherhood specifically, and a fair few now on entrepreneurship. But there doesn't seem to be a lot out there that kind of brings the two things together and talks about that unique set of challenges. So I think in a lot of ways this kind of happened organically, but when I realized that that was the content I was most excited about, and also that my listeners and my community are most excited about based on their feedback, based on statistics for who's listening to what episodes, it just made sense to kind of shift the focus of the podcast a bit. So I do want to say here, before I kind of move on to how things are changing, that I was a little bit hesitant to make the podcast, to niche the podcast down into that area, simply because I think there are so many places where women are pitted against each other. And one of the worst ones is women who have chosen to have children versus women who have chosen not to or who are unable to. And I really don't want to contribute in any way to a world that separates those two groups of women. However, on the other side of that, there are a lot of challenges that are unique to women who are, you know, the primary caregivers for children while also wearing that CEO hat for their small businesses. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, that set of challenges is a reason enough to try and find a way to bring those of us who are dealing with them together. So that is the direction the podcast is moving in. So Small Fish, Big Pod is no more. And I wanted to welcome you to the first official episode of the Self-Employed Mum podcast. This podcast is going to share the raw, honest truths of what it takes to be a mum and an entrepreneur. I imagine if you're listening to this, you are also in the thick of this now, or maybe it's a recent memory for you. Maybe your children are older and you are running a business while being a grandparent. There's so many different ways that, women can become caregivers. Some people are caring for elderly parents, or ill relatives or friends or partners. So I think a lot of this podcast will still remain relevant even if you are not a mother yourself or are not currently raising small children, because most of us, especially as women, play a caregiver role in some way. So hopefully that doesn't make anybody feel excluded. The subjects and the topics that we cover are still going to be very focused on running a small business, but from the framework and perspective of women who are doing that while raising a family. My guests will continue to be solely female entrepreneurs who are, as I said, raising small children at home. Every week I will have a different guest on. I'll try and keep these solo episodes to a minimum because I only like to hear my own voice so much, and I think it's so important to share the perspectives of other people and really make this feel like a community that everybody is welcome and a part of. So if you are a mum and an entrepreneur and you have a story to share, you want to talk about starting your business, building a business, how it's been for you, what your experience has been like, what challenges you have overcome, or if you are an expert in a certain area of small business ownership and want to speak specifically on that, but can share a little bit of your behind the scenes doing that as a mum as well, I would absolutely love to have you on the show. I have a couple of interviews banked already, which will be going out in January and February of this year. And I'm looking for guests sort of to plan from then onward. So if you or anyone you know would be willing to come on and share your story, I would love to have you. I say aiming because life gets busy, especially when you are a mum and entrepreneur, and best intentions sometimes still fall by the wayside. So my plan is to share these episodes bi-weekly for you. And you can access them now anywhere that you get your podcasts. The podcast has just been added to Amazon Music as well, so you should be able to find us easy enough. And finally, I would love it if you would like and follow the podcast. It makes a huge difference in terms of helping the podcast get out there and into the world. I have made the decision not to include any advertisements in the podcast right now because I know how annoying it is having a podcast. You're in the middle of listening to a great conversation and it's cut short for an ad. So I am hoping to keep this ad free for as long as possible, and helping to get the word out there makes the time and energy and effort that goes into creating this worthwhile, both for me and my guests. So I would super appreciate if you would share, if you're listening to this episode, like us and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And I think I will leave it there for now. I am excited to get back into podcasting again, to meet and chat with some fabulous new guests, and to bring this community back together and hopefully to grow it further as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be back soon with some new episodes to share.